A Man Called Possum, written by Max Jones, narrated by Graham Goodings. Spellbound. It was towards the end of the 1950s when Doug Osborne, an overseer stockman working at Ned's Corner Sheep Station on the banks of the River Murray above Renmark, was spellbound. He witnessed one of the most delicate operations he'd ever imagined. As an avid horseman and animal lover, in his own words, he related this experience to me. I was riding my horse across an island on the River Murray looking for stray sheep. It was a calm, mild day as I stopped to adjust my saddle. When I dismounted, I could hear someone talking not far away. I tethered my horse and walked over to a thicket of tea tree about 60 metres away, looked through the tea tree, and a further 60 metres or so away, I saw a man who I recognised as Possum. He was a person I'd only had fleeting glimpses of over the years, walking along the creeks and riverbanks, but I'd never spoken to him. He always seemed so shy and was a real mystery man. I knew he was fond of animals and birds, as I'd often found evidence of his work attending to sick and fly-blown sheep. He'd fish all day to feed the pelicans and cormorants, which had flown in from up north. It used to happen when their lakes had dried up. On this day, Possum was standing in a little grass-covered clearing. He had several horses standing around him and was holding one by the mane and appeared to be trying to get it to lie down. The horse was in a distressed and poor condition, and Possum kept repeating, "Easy, boy. Jim will make you better." Eventually he got that horse to lie down, and I could see a crow's nest of barbed wire tangle around its right foreleg. Possum sat down just under the horse's neck, placing his right arm over the top of its shoulder and stroking and patting it with his hand. All the while he was talking to it with soothing words. As I watched this drama, I became absolutely entranced and was frightened to move in case I disturbed the horses, which were quite wild, as they hadn't been used for years and just ran untamed on the island. Possum took a rusty-looking pair of wire cutters from his little sugar bag. It must have taken him 1/2 to 3/4 of an hour to cut all the barbed wire from around that poor horse's fetlock. And when he finished, Possum stood up and stretched, saying to the horse, "Now, isn't that better?" The horse was still lying on the ground, but had its head raised up, as if looking at what Possum had done. Possum appeared to be tearing up a flannel shirt he'd taken from his bag, and set about bandaging both forelegs after applying some ointment from a little jar, probably Stockholm tar, which he carried in his bag. While all this was going on, the other horses were standing in a ring around Possum and his patient, with their heads down like nurses and doctors in an operating theatre. Possum then packed his bag, helped the poor horse to its feet, and had a conversation with it as he patted its nose and neck. After digging a small hole and burying the scraps of barbed wire, Possum walked off with his little bag over his shoulder. Then something else quite remarkable happened. The sick horse limped after him. The other horses followed. I felt so emotional, and after I'd witnessed this wonderful and tender operation, that I wanted to rush over to congratulate him and tell him what a kind and thoughtful man he was. But something told me that it would be foolish to do so. I would have disturbed the horses and upset Possum, who was in his chosen domain. So I just watched him walk off with his team of wild horses. He was the only person who could have performed that operation without ropes, proper restraining gear, and other instruments. After shunning society for so many years, he must have developed an affinity with all the animals and birds, which would be envied by most people. As I recall that incident which held me spellbound that day, a lump comes into my throat. I so wanted to see Possum again, to praise him and thank him for what he'd done. But sadly, I didn't ever see him again. Although I did find some of his plants, with packets of salt, scraps of fishing lines, small bottles of sheep dip, as well as a small jar of Stockholm tar. There were many times over the following years when I sensed his presence in the vicinity of where I was working, as my dogs would act strangely and my horse would prick up its ears. A few times I was able to find his footprints and other signs, which led me to believe that he was avoiding me and didn't want to catch up. I respected his wishes and didn't try to track him down. I always felt good when I found signs of his presence over the years, as it was evidence that he was still well and probably happy enough in his chosen way of life. Doug Osborne concluded, "Whenever I had the opportunity, I'd leave salt, matches and odd pullovers or other clothing in his little niches, of which there were many, scattered along the river and the islands. It was always a thrill to find he'd made use of them, and he probably wondered who'd left the goodies for him.